Nikki Giovanni, welcome to Explorations in Black Leadership.
Thank you.
I want to ask a few questions about Brown versus Board of Education as we begin. Can you remember hearing about it, being decided? What did it mean to you?
Well, I don't want to say something like I was a kid.
You were 10 years old or younger?
I was born in 43, and so that was 54, so
Right.
I was maybe 11, so what, 5th grade. And what I remember was my parents, we lived in a suburb called Wyoming, Ohio, and it's outside of Cincinnati. It's about 20 miles outside of Cincinnati going north. And I remember everybody came home, right? And we lived at 1038 Burns. We had a front yard. And I remember because I was on my bike, and don't ask me why, but there was something in the air, and actually it was a little sidewalk sickle. And I remember leaving my bike in the yard, which I was not allowed to do, and running upstairs, and everybody, and I remember my father said, you know, now that'll show them. And I was trying to put together what everybody was excited about, but the whole neighborhood it was not a block party, but there was this sort of celebration that the Supreme Court
So people came out of their houses and gathered together?
Came out of, from work, because my parents were home, because my parents were school teachers, but they should not have been home when I was home. And, you know, again, I'm 11 years old, but that was my, if you said, what one thing do you remember about Brown? That's what I remember, and it just seemed like the whole neighborhood was excited about something, and the kids were trying to figure out what it was, because it was like May, so it wasn't any kind of holiday we could put our hands on, but everybody was happy.
Well, could you tell from the expressions of adults around you then, this was something positive had happened?
Oh, yeah.
And did you have any idea then what it meant?
No.
And what it was about? None at all. Can you remember when you discovered what this meant?
Sure, because my sister, even though it's Ohio, my sister, whose name is Gary, ended up going to Wyoming High School. And that turned out to be not one of the really great experiences in life, because what we're going to have the next year, and I remember that very vividly, is the murder of Emmett Till that August. And Gary and Beverly Waugh and someone else, I forget her name now, I can see her face, were the 3 black girls integrating Wyoming High School. And the Till case came up in a course that they no longer have. They used to be called civics. And the professor in civics said Emmett Till got what he deserved. And Gary and Beverly stood up and I do believe cursed at him.
Really?
Yeah, because you remember Jet had those pictures.
Yes.
And so there's no way that you could look at this and think that anybody, and you know, the families always had attitudes, I guess, but they were kicked out of school. I mean, he kicked them out of the class, and they went to the principal and they kicked them out. And Mr. Waugh, Beverly's father, and Gus, our father, went up to the superintendent of schools, not to the principal, but to the superintendent, and demanded an apology. And so that was my again, you know, what I was connecting the dots on, because Wyoming integrated, and that didn't seem a good idea. So I ended up attending school in Knoxville, Tennessee, because I remember the family discussion was, we've already given one to integration, so we're not going to give 2. That was probably my good luck.
Yeah. So looking back on it now from today's perspective, what has the Brown decision meant, both to you and generally speaking?
I think the Brown decision was absolutely crucial, because Plessy versus Ferguson had to be overthrown. Separate, as the Warren Court said, and thank God for the deaths and things that made that 9-0 decision possible, but separate is inherently unequal. If the question is, and I suppose it is a question, has this been troublesome to the black community, because it's put us in sort of a limbo, and the black community, I think, is still reeling from that limbo. Yeah, it's been troublesome, but it's been necessary, because we could not continue under an apartheid system. It just it's not going to work, and the Dred Scott decision was bad, and Plessy was worse, and it was time to bring America, as much as we can, into the 20th century, so that we could, you know, head for the 21st.
In the material prepared for this interview, I read something you'd said, and this is not a quote, that there were costs and benefits associated with Brown. Do you think the benefits outweighed the costs?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
it was worthwhile?
Absolutely. And I say that simply because a people cannot, I mean, this is Lincoln, I mean, God, what's wrong with that? Nikki Giovanni has to quote Abe Lincoln. But a people cannot exist half slave and half free. The barbarism that we saw from our fellow Americans was always there, and everybody tried to act like, oh, you know, maybe Mac Parker deserved it, maybe Emmett deserved it, maybe all of the bodies that we found, these were just guys who were raping white women, and what should we say about the women that we lynched, because we forget how many women were lynched and how many children. That had to stop. That had to stop. Somebody had to tell those people, you really cannot continue to murder black people with impunity the way that you're doing. And it's a message that still needs to be reinforced. You can't murder blacks. You can't murder gays. I mean, the Matthew Shepard is a white Emmett Till. You can't do that. It's time that we found another way to exist. It's clear when you look at the president, and I'm really not a fan of the president at all. I'm talking about Bush, in case this is 80 years from now. But Bush is an idiot, but he's also back to the level of barbarism. He thought, oh, I can just go and bomb these people and they'll, you know, what, love me? And I mean, it's got to stop. That level of violence has to stop. Martin was right. It has to stop. I don't know that we can make the beloved community, but you can't continue to put people over there and say, well, they're going to be all right. As much as you, and I don't want to speak for you, Julian, but we grew up in another kind of community that some would say, well, you all made out all right in segregation, but it was too high a price.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. There are people who say, well, look at you. You grew up under segregation. You grew up under segregation. You turned out okay. This was a nurturing time. All children learned how to read then. They don't now. They romanticize this past. Do you find that so?
I find that people want what is called the good old days, but I'm 60 years old. I talk to some people that I know, and they're saying, like, wasn't high school fun? And I don't remember a damn thing about high school that was fun, except that you got out of it. But I'm not nostalgic like that for the past, and I think that all children don't learn to read, by the way, today, but they should. Yeah. And we no longer have 8th grade. I grew up with 8th grade graduation, and we had 8th grade graduation because we knew that the majority of our classmates would not make it to the 12th grade. And they had kids like me who were going to be on what is called college track, but we had so many other kids who were going to be not on college track, who were being told, no, you do not have what it takes. So we in America, I teach at Virginia Tech, we are still having youngsters at Virginia Tech, black and white, who are first-generation college. So these were not good days, because now at least people feel like I should go to college, or I want my children to go to college, that I shouldn't just suck it up and say I'm not worthy.